Good evening, one and all. Thank you. I'm Tom Jacobs. This is a special meeting of the Bennington Select Board. It's Monday, June 4th. We're meeting here at the fire facility to basically have a informational meeting relative to the vote on the town charter amendments, which is going to take place tomorrow, June 5th. And we'll talk in greater detail about that in a second. But as we do with all our meetings, we initiate with a Pledge of Allegiance. Chad, would you lead us in that?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Chad. Since I've started the Pledge of Allegiance, could we just introduce ourselves to the community? Chad?
Sure. Good evening, Chad Gordon.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Jenkins.
Hi, I'm Donald Campbell.
Good evening, Carson Thurber.
And I'm Stuart Hurd, Town Manager.
And Nancy Lively's here to take the minutes of the meeting. Thank you all. As I said, this is an informational meeting. It's for the community to give some highlights relative to the Bennington Charter. I've got a very brief PowerPoint which will probably initiate the discussion if there is any or any questions. As I initiate or start the PowerPoint, feel free to interrupt. There's nothing sacrosanct about the process. It's part of the dialogue if you would like to have that. But the purpose of this is just to hit the highlights of the charter amendments which are going to be voted on tomorrow morning. Or for the day. What's the time of the vote, Stu?
7 a.m. to 7 p.m. the polls are open.
And that's in North Bennington as well?
In North Bennington as well.
Okay, great. Without further ado, I'm just going to step over here and see if I can get anybody to comment on my Jacob Shoes bicycle for his PowerPoint on a charter. Chad had it. Basically, charters go round and round, and we just keep on going, you know. But the essence of it today is that we're talking about our charter, which is our governing document. That document really portrays what our town government is for ourselves and our community. It's been rather stale over the years. We came to a conclusion last May of 2017, that we really needed to revisit the charter because, as I said, it really didn't speak to the 21st century in a lot of different ways. The existing charter of the town of Bennington reflects concerns to improve the quality of life for all people. That's great. That's in our existing charter. But we felt that there should be something more. We felt that there should be an addition to improve the operation of the town government. Because our government is really our stake in the action. This is what makes this community roll. And our charter is that governing tool. So what we did is we said, we need a committee to take and review our charter in its entirety. And basically what happened was, you know, why do all this work? Was it to give 7 volunteer citizens something to do for 6 months? Sean Marie will attest to that. Or to modernize a document that guides our town government, or clean up ambiguities, redundancies, and grammatical shortcomings from previous charter reviews. This is not the first time that this has been done. This charter has been reviewed, 4 to 5 different times, probably during Stu's regime?
Yeah, actually before my regime as well.
Exactly. So this charter is something that should be and has been reviewed from time to time, but hadn't been looked at since 2005. The effort was, we decided we needed to look at this document because it is our governing and direction tool. We wanted to look at that document to clean up any ambiguities, redundancies, and grammatical shortcomings from previous charter reviews. It's very interesting that this Charter Review Committee spent a lot of time and a lot of effort reviewing not just any particular subsection, it spent time going through each and every section of our charter. It could have said, well, let's just go to the highlights. It didn't do that. It decided that it was more important to take a comprehensive review of the entire document. And where there were changes that were recommended or suggested, to, in fact, spend more time and effort on those. The charter itself consists of 8 subchapters. The review committee, after 5+ months, spent a lot of time in reviewing the entire document, but found there were certain sections which required more consideration, more detail, more thought. But you're going to see that of these 8 subchapters, very few actually resulted in substantial changes to that document. Most important areas I'm going to try to just touch on and spend a little bit more time than some of these other areas, which I think were basically changes in form, grammatical changes, really cleaning up this document. So that the next time this review takes place, the review committee won't have to spend so much time on the document itself to find out if there are redundancies and other areas of concern. And I think that's one of the real good things that came out of that review. First part that deals with the town government, but that was of substantial nature, dealt with the subchapter 3 on the select board. In fact, section 3031. Under that section, there is a portion that relates to our fire department. That particular part of the review appeared to cause more interest and concern, primarily from the fire department. The town of Bennington is very fortunate to have and have been served for many, many years with a volunteer fire department. Volunteer has been the key indication. The change that was suggested by the committee is that the charter amendment provides that they will continue in that same vein unless an affirmative vote of the majority of the members of the fire department authorize a transition to a paid staff, including the volunteers. The essence of it is that the town is relying upon its fire department to continue to provide services through its volunteer source. Volunteerism is becoming a challenge, and that's not just in Bennington, it's across the spectrum. Folks have so many responsibilities of their time and effort and family considerations. There is a possibility at some time in the future that the fire department may come and say, we can't provide the fire protection that this community warrants, and we need to look at other ways of doing that. We as a fire department are suggesting that rather than just have a volunteer department, that we engage and possibly pay some for all of the members. We're nowhere near that, I can tell you that right now. But our charter allows the department itself to come to the select board and also the citizens say, we need help. If we're going to provide this critical support, we've got to have a way to do that. And this charter change allows that process should and when that occurs. We're hoping that, I think the fire department themselves are hoping that a call to arms, a clarion call, will continue to get those volunteers that are necessary, but there's no guarantees that that's going to happen for the entire future. In the event that the fire department determines we're really short of volunteers, what do we do? Well, they would propose to the select board with a committee formed to see how that is going to be addressed. And that may be a recommendation to bring in additional towns into a consortium of fire departments. It's something that the charter gives the fire department working with the town government the ability to meet that potential issue and concern. Also under the select board's jurisdiction is the select board organization itself. There are certain changes that have been recommended and the select board has considered. And I'll just read them as more important ones that come down. A, the chair shall be the head of the town government for all ceremonial purposes. We know there are more and more times when the town is called on to meet responsibilities out in the community, ribbon cutting, being involved in activities and all that. Really, it's very difficult to perform that activity just through the town manager's office. It's helpful if the select board could potentially designate its chair or vice chair to go and represent the town in those capacities, because it's important that the select board demonstrate to the community that we are important parts and face of the community, and we support the efforts that the organizations are bringing, or the businesses that are coming to Bennington. So that select board chair would be the spokesperson, the appearance person. And I can tell you already, the select board, talk about volunteers. They have been ready, willing, and able to step up and go to these type of organizational activities. And as we know, there's so many efforts throughout the town of Bennington that call upon citizens and also the leaders to participate in that action. This is actually just to formalize that potential, so the chair has some responsibility to make sure that we are recognized there. The select board shall adopt rules of procedure for the conduct of meetings. The board shall review the rules of procedure annually. This is an important part of the document of the charter. There are ways that the select board can conduct business, but it helps to have within the context of the select board a reference point itself. What are the rules? How are meetings called? How do you address the public? And it's tried to make the select board as responsive as possible to the community, so that there are rules that we as select board members and the community recognize as how we interact, how we interface with each other, so that there's consistency. That's somewhat been a challenge over the years, whether or not we do the same thing all of the time. And these rules of civil procedure, back to court, these rules of procedure give a sort of a guideline that the select board members will be able to review and apply on a bi-weekly basis throughout the year. Those are rules that should be reviewed just to make sure that they're responsive to the needs of the community and the board during that time. So those rules are very important. We've got a very broad statement of rules of procedure, but they are areas which we as a select board have to make sure are responsive and timely. This has been sort of not a bugaboo, but it's an issue, maybe more potential, maybe more historical. So I can tell you the existing select board and those that I've sat on for the last couple of years have not had this as an issue. But if a select board member is absent for 4 consecutive warned select board meetings, or is absent for more than 50% of the warned meetings in any 6-month period, the member's office shall be vacated in accordance with the charter. If you're elected as a select board member, you have a responsibility to be there. We have a responsibility to be there. And if you can't make it because Florida beckons for 3 or 4 or 5 months, well, that maybe you should be spending your attention and your years there rather than hoping that when you get back you'll all be caught up. There's so many issues that we as a town and a select board have to address. We can't have gaps in information and participation. And I don't think that's going to get any easier. I think it's in fact probably going to be even more demands of the next select board. So we have to have members present. This is just a process so that it's to put all select board members on notice that there is a process, and if you can't meet that responsibility, you should think about maybe not either running or to step down from the position, because there are folks that we need to step into that post. The other area of the charter which the committee recommended, spent a considerable amount of time, dealt with the engagement of the town manager. Under the terms of the recommendation in the select board's recommendation as well through the town voters, is that there be a term limit identified within the town manager's contract. Many towns, and ours as well, have just had an at-will open engagement. It's probably important that we actually have a relationship with the manager that spells out times and terms. That times and terms would be set forth in a 3-year contract, having in mind that if you've got a good town manager, you're not going to want to just say after 3 years, that's the end of it. It may be renewed for successive 3-year terms as the select board deems appropriate. It's important that we also recognize that there may come a time when it's important that, notwithstanding a 3-year term, that the committee or select board could be subject to removal for no cause. And that would be circumstances which the town and the manager would work out. But what I like about the recommendation and our suggestion to the voters is that you now have a town manager system which provides for term limits subject to being potentially renewed. So the essence of it is the town manager knows, and it would also help relative to evaluations so that you've got a benchmark. And so the town manager isn't surprised, and at the end of a year or 2 or 3, relative to the success of his or her
Tom,
oversight. Yes.
Tom, if I could add to this, having sat through the committee meetings, the intent here is not to create, in a sense, a written contractual obligation on either party. It's really to force the select board to review that town manager's position and the person filling it on a 3-year basis. So the removal still stands as 90 days notice. So if a select board is unhappy with the manager in the middle of that 3-year term, they can still remove the manager with 90 days notice. There's no written contract that obligates the board for a time or a payment or a severance package in this wording. It's really meant to, in a sense, make sure that we look at that position and that person in the position at least on a 3-year basis.
I think it was really insightful for the committee to do that. And I think also in the future when there's a successor to Stu, that manager, he or she, when she comes and has a discussion relative to that position, she will know that there is a process, 3-year term, potentially subject to renewal or termination. But if I were making a commitment to the town, if I were a town manager candidate, it's nice to see that I've got some stability to move my family here, to make a commitment to this community, so that there is really a reference point. I think that probably will be helpful in the future. Again, when Stu decides the time is up, or any time thereafter. This also suggests, as part of that commitment that the board makes to the manager and the manager to the board, again, when we're talking about commitment, it's basically a commitment to the community. We as select board members are nothing but representatives of the community. So we as representatives are charged under the terms of the new charter amendments to review the town manager's performance annually. That has been done, but it's been rather, hit or miss up until the last couple of years. It's never been codified, which now the charter will do. So that the next board that comes on, they will know they've got a responsibility to the town and to the manager to make sure that that is done. Another area that is spelled out is the duties of the town manager. Under the terms of the existing manager's contract in the charter, the managers are the town's purchasing agent. This is a codification, a statement that as a general purchasing agent, she or he has the responsibility pursuant to the purchasing and bid policies approved by the select board. There is an old purchasing bid policy that circulates somewhere, but it's really time, and I think that's one of the things that we're going to be working on in the next couple of months to update and put teeth into that policy so that there will be no or fewer questions relative to how bidding goes, how purchasing contracts are awarded. That's not to say that what has been done is full of problems. What it means is that it's going to be transparent so that folks that have a question about the bidding or other policy can actually see, here's the document, here's what the board has done, here's how the manager carries forward with that responsibility. It's time, like the charter, their policies have to be updated. One thing about policies versus charter, it's a lot easier to deal with. We can change policies at the determination of the select board. The charter is the process document, but it's also the governing tool. that makes that happen. And as Stu referenced earlier, the town manager could be removed without cause for 90 days' notice. I don't think that's something we have to dwell on, because I'm feeling that when we have this 3-year contract agreement, and it doesn't, as Stu said, have to be so formal, but it should be so that there's an understanding that here's day 1, here's day 3, here's year 3, what's been done to renew that contract, which makes it better for the select board, the manager, and the community. Then we have the taxation section. Select board, the manager section, including the fire department. Those were the sort of the substantive areas of consideration, and well, if you look at all of the effort of that review committee, where the time was spent. But the other area which has spent some considerable time are in the taxation section. Under Section 502, all incurred debt for water and sewer services shall be paid by the owners of real estate that is serviced by municipal water and sewer. This is basically just a restatement of what actually has been done, but I think it's important that our charter continue to reference that she or he that uses gets to pay. And we're dealing with that right now with our water department, with our sewer departments, and all of those other things together. But the payers of that service are the users of that services. The other area of taxation dealt with the Bennington Downtown Improvement District. This states that following the public hearing, the select board may approve the change to the areas of the district at a duly called regular meeting or special select board meeting. Prior to the suggested change, that would have to go through a whole town-wide vote. That seems awful, exhaustive, and rather kind of ridiculous when you can define the district by reviewing the map, making recommendations, having a dialogue at 2 public hearings before the select board, and then possibly redrawing or retracing the district lines. Just have in mind that prior to the recommendation, any changes in that area being finalized, the Bennington Improvement District requires a vote of the voters. So we can change the lines, but if you're going to be making changes in the area, it's under the new charter changes, the voters will be able to weigh in. But it starts with our effort to select board. I didn't mean to block that out. This next one. Go ahead.
You actually skipped over one, Tom.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, I've got it. Thanks, thank you, Frank. The relative to downtown improvement tax district levies, it will be now levied on the owners of the taxable properties in the district, except for owner-occupied properties. That's the addition, except for owner-occupied properties. So, go ahead.
And it's owner-occupied residential properties. That's the clarification.
Okay. Occupied residential properties. Yep, I'm sorry. That's what happens when you do your own. So, if you occupy, and it may be a business, but you live there, you, as I understand it, will not be taxed. That's correct. But in the old days, prior to the change in the charter, anyone within that district that has a business undertaking, even if they live there, is subject to the levy.
Well, actually, the charter currently provides that all residential properties, whether owner-occupied or not, are tax exempt from the district. So this actually increases the grand list in the district, spreads the tax over a greater number of properties.
Okay. We'll talk about that.
Stu, or Tom?
Yes.
And the idea being that if it's spread out over more properties, it'll be,
Less.
it doesn't increase, it doesn't make it a set tax that raises the budget. It's a certain budget that's spread out among more properties.
Gotcha. Sean Marie is suggesting is that once you have the budget for that district, it's got to be paid for. The taxes have to be levied. But actually having it a broader you're spreading out that potential obligation on a broader scheme. Is that fair? This area of taxation deals with local sales tax option, and I underline that. It's not an action to impose such a tax now or in the future. Background on this, as I have come to understand it, is that the legislature has given those towns defined as gold towns, which are basically giving taxes to the state, the opportunity historically to impose a local sales tax. Prior to a couple of years ago now, is it? The legislature has given...
This all came about relating to Act 60 when it was first passed to change the education funding mechanism. And because gold towns are towns that pay more in to the education fund than they receive in funding, were given an opportunity to impose a local option tax, and there are 4 categories to essentially help them subsidize their payments in. Those towns that were receiving towns were not allowed under law to ask for a local option tax, which Bennington is a receiving town and has been for all these years. And we have tried through our legislative delegation to get that law changed without success. And some now, there are at least a number of towns and cities that have changed this through a charter change, which the legislature then must approve.
The essence of it is coming in, the legislature's allowed charter changes to be a way for those towns to potentially have a local sales tax option. It's that using the charter, their charter.
And I think it comes down to a specific change to a given community's charter versus a blanket overall approval for everybody to have at it.
Right. I think that's a critical part of this. This does not mean that Bennington's going to have a local sales tax. It just states that the town of Bennington will have, within its charter, a mechanism in the future, should it decide by vote of the public to have a local sales tax. Going through an entire process, the town could adopt it. But there is no indication by this charter change that there is going to be an immediate sales tax levied. I think that's really important and maybe a misconception. Many of us will say, I'm not for a local sales tax, but who knows what tomorrow might bring. I'm saying that personally. Let's keep this as an available tool for our community if sometime in the future the community decides that this is a tool that it wants to implement. It does not mean that if the charter is approved by the town voters and the legislature that we're going to be enacting a sales tax of 1% or any percent. This does not give the select board or the town without a full process the opportunity to enact such a tax. It just, yes, go ahead.
So I also would like to add that, and it needs another vote of all the Bennington citizens if it was to go in place. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Jim Therian right now because he did a really wonderful job in the recent article on the different towns that actually have received, that have this in place and how much goes upstate and how much goes to their town and the different
It's a
the
great,
ups and downs, so thank you.
yeah, it's a great resource. As Sean Marie is saying, it allows the town owners, if they receive, it actually starts, I think, with the select board, then going through the review process, and actually would end up with the town vote. I could tell you right now, if we started tonight, this would not happen for next years or years, because there's such an interest and there's so much research that would have to go into it, including like the activity that Banner and Jim Therian have undertaken. Again, thank you.
I think the other point worth making is that it's flexible in its detail also. It could be on room taxes, it could be on alcohol, it could be, there's loads of flexibility in this. This is something that is just a capacity
This is it. It
people
doesn't.
in the town deserve and can have. And I can't imagine that this would be an extremely silly thing to reject.
And I think the other, besides those types of activities that might be subject to that tax levy, it's also what would you use the result of that for? And before any vote would be presented to the public, I expect the public is going to be very interested in the event that we provide this, where does it go from and where does it go to? And I think that's exactly right, Susan. Let's see. I think,
What's the line that
let me back that up if I can see. It might be nice. It's a 1% sales tax or use tax. And as Susan is suggesting, it could be on alcohol, it could be on...
Yes, no, I'm just saying, there's some printing that's blocking out.
It says
On any or all
a number of activities.
a number of activities and elected for. I'm sorry, my PowerPoint
Can I
is...
add something about the tax?
Sure, go ahead, please.
I have heard throughout the year that there will be 4 options to choose from. February 22nd, in the banner, Stewart stated that the rooms and meals tax would not be included. So to me, when I look at that, I look at a townwide local sales tax.
That's just the type of question that I think would have to be deliberated, discussed, because I don't think we have come to any idea of which of these potentials would stay in or stay out. You've got to look at all the ramifications. I look at it right now, can our town afford any kind of an additional sales tax?
Okay.
Some folks will say, if you're going to do something, you
But I
should
have
do it.
heard 4 options, and what I have looked back and read the banner, February 22nd, Mr. Hurd stated that the rooms and meals tax would not be included as an option.
I'm sure Stu would like to respond to that.
Well, that's true. That was during the Charter Review Committee's efforts, and at that time, the staff was focusing only on the local option sales tax, not rooms and meals, not alcohol, and it's rooms, meals, and alcohol are the other 3 options. We were recommending that we not consider those. The Charter Review Committee decided in the end to recommend that we have all 4 options available to us going forward.
Okay. And you have those in front of you. I didn't bring mine down. What are those? There are 4 different...
It's a sales tax, it's a rooms tax, it's a meals tax, and it's an alcohol tax. And many communities combine rooms and meals. Many communities only use alcohol. I think if you read Jim's story, Manchester has recently added the tax to, I believe it's alcohol and meals, because they're doing very well in the restaurant business, and they saw that the sales tax was starting to drop off. So they added those 2 taxes to boost the income that Manchester receives from this particular tax.
And you had some other points on that? Yes.
Well, I guess I'll be the squeaky wheel and speak for
No, that's good.
those of us who are old Vermonters. We aren't a gold town. The seniors, the people in poverty, the working class, the homeowners, we're struggling to pay our bills. To me, it's ridiculous that we're even considering adding a local options tax. Every time you turn around in this town, somebody comes up with a great idea, comes before the select board, great, let's put some money into that. It defies logic to me.
I can tell you, in order to show that logic is part of the discussion, that voters would have to decide whether or not an option should be exercised. Right now, we have no tool. And this is to give the town, the voters, the option of saying, should we do this or should we not do this because situations like you? Or should we just deal with beer and wine and that type of thing? And many folks think a lot of taxes are regressive, you know. But granted, we have to look at what is the capacity of the town, what's the capacity of the area to deal with and take some of the assets that we have for the benefit of our community and everyone in it, including the working person. And it's not to try to jump around the question, but this is only to create an area within our charter so that we can have a real discussion whether or not this makes any sense. Right now, we can't even have a discussion. I hear what you're saying, is let's not even have a discussion.
I guess I don't think it should even be in there. We pay enough taxes in this town now.
Well, again, I can't tell you if I'm for or
I
against.
understand.
Yeah, but I can tell,
what you're saying,
yeah.
But I'm looking at it from the
I
other
know.
side.
Well, I'd like to, get on the other side with you, is that we should be looking at it whether or not the tax base in this community right now is challenged, without a doubt. You can give me that, right?
Oh,
It's difficult.
absolutely.
If there are other means that the town can benefit and that tax base can benefit, and without causing harm to the local community and the taxpayers, we should not look away from looking at that.
Tom, can I add to that?
Yeah.
One of the problems that Bennington has is that we are a hub community. We provide shopping services for a region far beyond just the Bennington residents. And what the local option tax of any kind would do is it would ask those folks who are coming here to shop and to use our services to help us pay for those services. And in some estimates some time ago predicted that Bennington would see approximately $900,000 a year in new revenue from a local option tax. The select board would then determine how to use that revenue, and part of that determination could be to lower the tax rate, the residential property tax rate, for those voters who live in town. So you could use some of those funds to actually reduce the burden on local property owners. You could use those funds to pay for bond votes and infrastructure improvements that you would not then have to ask the taxpayer to pay for. So there are options beyond just, it's going to cost me another 1% to go buy a particular grocery item or whatever that is subject to the tax, because other people coming into the community are going to pay that 1% as well, and that's where the benefit arises.
But the majority of the people who will be paying the tax are the people who live here year-round.
That's right, but
Not necessarily looking for a tax on roads.
Why would you tax the motels and the restaurants? These are businesses that are struggling. It would make no sense to tax them. And so my train of thought is, if you aren't going to tax the businesses, why would you tax the people who live here now?
Tom, if I may, why would we, it's difficult to have this conversation without dropping into a debate about an options tax, and it feels to me like this is really, what we're really talking about is,
It's a process.
should the legislature be deciding this, or should the town voters be deciding this?
Mm-hmm.
And it feels to me what we're trying to set up is a system where the town voters can make a decision as to whether or not they want to do this. And I don't know why we would not want to vest this decision with the voters of Bennington.
As I said right at the outset, our charter is our governing document. This is a potential use of a tool. Today we have no tool. We have no way of meeting those things. This down the road, and I'm telling you it's not going to be next year probably, at least I have no inclination, I have not heard that there's an interest in adopting a local sales tax. This gives us the possibility in the future for the town to decide if they want to add to their tool chest, to reduce taxes and do all of those things for the community, which we can't do right now. We have limited resources within our community. The taxpayer is overburdened. This is a way that we're trying to broaden the potential of the income to the community, and this sales tax would give that option. Lastly, the committee that did all of this work, they met weekly, Wednesdays, for 4 to 5 months, Robert? 6 months. And they spent so much time, not only on dialoguing these matters, which I've given a 38,000-foot discussion about, but the entire charter to make it meaningful to our community. And right now, we can have a model charter that other towns could be very proud of what we've done and what they could look to. Again, thanks to the committee. Your 7 members are pretty special, and I would be remiss if we didn't recognize that, because we wouldn't even be here, and our town would not be well served. But the select board and the community is very, very appreciative of your effort. Thank you. Now, specific questions that haven't been addressed, and it's fine to be, it's better to have a discussion, but without getting into the proverbial weeds. But this is a process that's been ongoing, and I highly recommend that the town voters vote it through so that the legislature can hopefully endorse it as well. Any other questions?
Tom, would you just go for anyone who might
Sure.
be watching the process from
Sure.
tomorrow forward?
In the event that the voters of the North Bennington and Bennington approve the charter in its entirety, it will then be presented to the legislative council. I expect that in the
Yes,
legislature.
the town clerk actually is responsible for sending it on to the Secretary of State's office, who then takes it to legislative council, puts it into an act that would probably be considered by the legislature next legislative session.
January of 2019.
Next January of 2019.
So at that point, it comes back to the town. If the legislature approves it, it'll come back as a fully adopted.
Most
charter.
likely would become law July 1 of 2019.
And then we'll start looking at a committee to review the charter. But thanks for coming out, and I hope the community does support this effort. Thank you.
Wes, we got a question.
Oh, well, good. That's good. I'm done with the PowerPoint.
Go back to 506, please.
Yeah. Go right ahead. Additions to
The way
the...
that I'm reading the charter, currently, the citizens of Bennington, for the past 15 years, we needed a townwide vote before the downtown district boundaries can be changed.
That's the last paragraph.
Right. If the charter passes tomorrow, doesn't that mean we will lose that right to vote on the downtown district boundaries?
The select board will actually approve the change.
Okay, well, totally against that. The biggest supporters of downtown Bennington for the past 25 years have been the local taxpayers. Millions of our tax dollars have gone into the downtown revitalization. The fact that you want to take away our right before you can expand the downtown district is wrong. To change it so just the 7 select board members will change the district after one public hearing, sorry, it doesn't work.
I think it works real well, and that's why you have representatives that represent all components of the town. The essence of this expansion of the district is not to make the tax larger within the district. It's actually to spread it so that everyone will get the benefit of the taxes and no one party we're going to have to be seeing a large jump in their taxes. Jean Marie, what was your thought?
Rob can chime in here as well. But one of the items that were discussed was the fact that when Bennington, the whole town of Bennington voted on it, you had people in North Bennington, Bennington, out on the west end, the east end, and really the taxing district was just the lines of the downtown district. And what we thought was appropriate was that the select board notify all the people in the downtown district on the hearings that they would have on if they were going to expand it or shrink it, or really that was the two things. And I think we wrote in that it had to have at least one hearing, which would be you'd have 2 select board meetings and a separate hearing.
That's right.
That was our thinking. It wasn't about taking away the vote for the whole town. The town had done that originally. And now the area was much smaller than the 16 or 15,000. How many voters?
15 plus.
Yeah, how many voters? Kathy? 200.
those that are in the district pay the tax, right? You know?
But there are many programs that our local and state tax dollars pay for in the downtown district.
Exactly.
And as the years have gone on, we've been told less and less who's getting our money, how it's being spent, and what the end result is.
You know, I just beg to differ. I've sat through meeting after meeting when we have grant applications and discussions. These funds are available to the town for the tax to use, and we have to have a downtown district. And we only get that if we have that process. So I disagree. There has been a lot of discussion about it. But Robert, you might maybe...
Yeah, I just want to say, I was on the Charter Review Committee. So when we were looking at this section, okay, and we're reading it, and we're understanding, it. So it was totally appropriate at the very beginning to have the voters of the town approve this district, to create this downtown district to benefit the town, whatever the goals were. But as a review committee, when we're looking at it, our charge was to look at the charter with an eye towards improving town government, the operation of town government. It made sense to us that in the future, any changes to this map are going to be in the form of tweaks. Maybe this section over here needs to be included, this part over here needs to be excluded. And it seemed to us, from a management point of view, to make much more sense to leave those decisions in the hands of the select board, who are elected by the people of the town. It's their duty to do these things, to run the town, to make these decisions. It didn't seem to us necessary for every time part of this boundary had to be changed to have it go to an entire vote of the entire town. Your specific concerns about communication, about how the money's being spent, those are all valid. That didn't have anything to do with what we were looking at. Those are valid points, and points that should be, questions that should be answered. But from purely a management administrative point of view, it made sense to those of us on the committee that these small adjustments to this map could be handled by our elected representatives, and that's why we decided to do
I respectfully but strongly disagree.
That's all right.
Again, it's more power being taken from the citizens of this town.
I respectfully disagree with your conclusion, but you know, the essence of it is that's why we have a select board representing each and every member of this community. And as I said, there are hour after hour that this select board has reviewed grant applications as far as receiving them, and we only get them because of our designation in our district. We approve or disapprove of that, and we know where the funds are going to come from, and we know where they're going to go. That's not going to change with this change in that charter.
Can I just
Yes.
add something? Also,
You might want to speak better.
The downtown improvement district changes to that don't just also happen here. That has to also be ultimately approved by the downtown board. So this year, for example, when we reviewed our downtown, we did our downtown designation renewal. I think it was not Bennington. Yes, Bennington. That I think did some changes to its boundaries, and it wasn't just about the town coming with that proposal. It had to actually also be reviewed. So none of this is a one-off process. There are several layers to getting an ultimate, getting the map changed and approved.
So basically, if we want to change that map, change the district, there is a process that the community would be involved with. So because there would be public hearings, and if you have those concerns, that where the funds are coming and where they're going, that would be the time to address those. You got a couple of other items?
No, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
I know how the public hearing will turn out if it involves the downtown.
How? How's it going to turn out?
Obviously, with the downtown.
What was that? How do you think it's going to turn out?
I'm sorry?
How do you think it's going to turn out? You said you know how it's going to turn
The
out.
downtown district will be expanded.
Just was curious.
And again, when all the downtown projects started, everybody supported it. We wanted to help the downtown. We knew ahead of time who was looking for our money and how they would use it. And we watched over time as we have been told less and less. As an example, when Mr. Appleton came to town, we knew ahead of time how much of our money he wanted for what projects. We knew when we did 210 South Street, where what the budget was going to be. The project went on forever. We did end up spending more, but I think people felt it was the right thing to do. The grocery store he built on Tuttles's lot. A lot of state and local taxes went into that. Went out of business 4 months after it opened. And I think as these projects go on, I think the taxpayers are totally out of the loop. We haven't been involved in any of the downtown and two projects.
If you're referring to the Putnam redevelopment project?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because at this particular point in time, the town has very little financial stake. With the Appleman projects, those were significant town investments, and even in those were private investments.
But it was all private investment.
Yeah.
The town did not invest money in the grocery store that he built or in 210 South Street. I don't believe we even loaned him money there.
None of those projects took a dime of downtown improvement district money. So what folks need to understand is this is a tax on folks that live in that district. It's not a tax on the entire town. And those funds are used inside that district.
I understand about the taxes in the downtown, but there are other programs that are paid for with taxpayer dollars that are also used in the downtown district, are there not?
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with the boundaries of the district. They just happen to be in the downtown. They don't, it's not because, it's not any money that the government raises from taxpayers to pay for it.
So in other words, if that organization was somewhere outside, they would still get.
They'd still be eligible.
And the only areas outside would be the revolving loan funds. No, I'm not sure what funds you're talking about.
Well, and perhaps, some of the enhancement grants that have been spent in the downtown, where we redid Union Street, we're now about to redo Pleasant Street. Those are federal and state dollars that we apply for to improve the infrastructure, that is the streets and the sidewalks and the drainage. They don't go to individual property owners for their benefit or their profit.
Who will be maintaining all of the public improvements that are being proposed in the downtown and TIF districts on private properties?
There are no public improvements to private properties proposed. Any public infrastructure improvement will be built or spent on public properties only, and they will be maintained by the town.
Isn't the junior high a privately owned property?
It is.
And didn't I read that the town wants to buy that part of that property and put a public parking lot on it?
No,
Not in the TIF district, then?
no. That is not a proposal that is out there. And if an investor came along that wanted to make that property into something productive, would the town participate with its revolving loan program or one of those programs that we have available to us that are not taxpayer funded, but they're monies that have come to us over the years? We probably would want to help an investor develop that property and put it back into productive use. But we have no plans to buy any of it and turn it into public property at this time anyway.
And not to belittle or extend the discussion on this, but improvements, infrastructure improvements, the entire town benefits by that. It increases the value of our community so that investment comes in the form of private and other investment opportunities. If we have a lousy infrastructure, we're going to have a lousy downtown and a lousy community. So I think it's important that we understand when we invest money, a dollar, we expect to get a return for the taxpayer. Right now, we're at the cusp of something like that happening, and we're hoping that that will actually happen, that the investment will bear fruit. But our entire community cannot stand still. And I think each of the taxpayers, and myself included, not looking to have our taxes raised, but looking for a return on our investment. When we pay taxes, we're actually making an investment in our community. But we have to have something that we can be comfortable in investing. It's almost that simple. Keep on going. You got some more thoughts that we'd like to...
The ballot itself?
Cassie, would you just talk about the ballot is in the...
Yeah.
And what's available to the...
I understand the ballot is legal. I just don't understand why nobody brought it to our attention, that there was a chance we would be looking at a ballot with no information. We should have been told that at the very start of the charter process. I'm not saying that you are, I'm just asking why members of the select board didn't make us aware of that.
Frankly, this is a process, ongoing process, and the essence of the review and also the review by the select board has been all-encompassing. There have been meeting after meeting, hearing after hearing. If you expected to go into the ballot box tomorrow and have a comprehensive review of the charter, you're sorely mistaken. The responsibility of the community and the voters is to get educated, and we've had opportunity to do that. So I'm not complaining about the shortness of it. It is an up or a down. We feel that the charter itself speaks to why it should be adopted.
We've had 3 charter amendment votes in the past. I believe in the past there has always been, each of the articles have been mentioned on the ballot, have they not?
Well, those changes were all very specific changes to a particular section. We've not had a comprehensive review of the charter in more than probably 30 to 35 years.
I understand that only sections have been done in the past.
So that section was listed, and it was a yes or no vote. There wasn't any additional information on the ballot that explained what the section was. All of that information was provided by the board prior to the vote. The person walking into the ballot just read the section, and it was yes or no. There wasn't anything else there.
And that's what the law requires. The ballot either has to be just a yes or no question with the information in the move, or it has to be voted by subchapter. I believe, I'm not sure if it was the charter review committee or if it was the select board over the winter. I think briefly discussed whether they wanted each subchapter as a ballot article, which is 8, or if they just wanted one question, yes or no, up or down. That's what they decided.
I thought in the past when we voted, it showed what was being deleted and what was being added. I thought that's what we would vote on.
That will be in the booth. It is required that a copy of the charter be in each booth so that you can look and see what's being added and deleted. It's all highlighted. It's properly strike through or underlined to show new and deleted material. That will be in each voting booth tomorrow.
Didn't members of the select board, weren't you surprised at today's 14th meeting to find out how the ballot was appearing? Wasn't that the purpose of this meeting tonight, to clear up confusion on the ballot?
I hope that at least in part was the purpose of tonight's meeting, yes. Yeah. Not the ballot. The ballot is the ballot. That was warned, duly warned and legal.
Yeah. And you know, we sought legal counsel when we prepared the warning for this, and there really are only 2 options. You either list every single section with the changes on the ballot, which would probably make for a 3 or 4 page ballot that you would be working your way through, or you determine that the ballot would be too unwieldy and too long, and you would put one question, up or down, yes or no. And it was this board's determination that a yes or no vote on the entire ballot, on the entire charter change, would be appropriate. And I think it is. I mean, this has been reviewed numerous times, not only by the Charter Review Committee, through various public hearings and meetings, but also by this board at regularly scheduled meetings. We took up 2 or 3 sections of the charter and we discussed them at length, frankly.
I understand that, but it was my understanding, didn't you state at the May 14th meeting that you were surprised how the ballot was appearing?
Yes, I did say that I was surprised, and I do believe I think Jim Barlow was the attorney that we used through the process from our end when we were done, had recommended a certain way to do it. It was kind of out of our control. Yes, I personally was surprised. I did not expect it to be that way, but it doesn't mean that, as Cassie said, it wasn't legal. And I do believe that Jim Barlow waited after our committee was done.
I understand now that it's legal, but I just don't think that's how people expected it would appear.
Right.
I thought many of us thought we would see the 4 or 5 major things that have been discussed during the year.
The unfortunate part is that you can't make a determination that these sections are non-controversial and therefore you can just have a yes or no vote on all of this, and these sections are controversial, and so you're going to have them piece by piece. You can't do that under the law. So our choice was to have each section on the ballot with a yes or no vote, and/or the entire charter up or down. Now, the warning required that we give the summary that I've been handing out to folks. That had to be included in the warning to explain those changes, but that is not required to be on the ballot. In fact, yeah.
One last question.
Sure.
Why is this being done at a special meeting?
Because there seemed to be an interest in having an informational discussion that I and my colleagues felt, there's a vote tomorrow, just like any
I'm
other.
talking, why are we voting on the charter at a special meeting tomorrow?
Oh.
She means why is it?
Oh, why is it? I thought you meant tonight. This is a special meeting too. No, that's fine. We're voting on it because when we decided on the process for review, recommendation, and the board decision, that we didn't want this to take on a life of its own. We wanted to have a starting point and an opportunity and an ending point for the community to vote up or down. Because we could go on forever. And frankly, a charter, I should have said earlier, it's a living, dynamic document. We'll be revisiting this, and maybe just in part over the next couple of years, certain areas. But
I think if you could address is it March?
March.
The March ballot had all the different service agencies, the mayoral question, the budget, and I think that we as a committee wanted to make sure there was time for you as a select board to vet it and to see it. I'm not answering the date about June, but I'm saying that I think the consensus was that the March ballot was too, I shouldn't say too full, but it was full of other items that needed attention, like at the floor meeting, all the nonprofits stood up and was there.
yeah, and I think November is not a good time. I can suggest that our town is not really equipped to deal with a significant issue like this.
No, the November election is generally a state and/or a state and federal election. It's technically not a local election, except for, I think, Justice of the Peace are local officers that are elected in November. To try to combine this local issue with the overall state and federal election would have been quite something, wouldn't it, Cassie?
And again,
We
we're not.
don't have town issues on the state or federal ballot.
That's right.
We're not trying to rush this through. It's had a lot of dialogue, a lot of thought. Having it before, the summer vacations seemed an appropriate time to do. So that's why we sort of thought this is a good time to have this vote.
Special elections usually have a low turnout anyways, and it's a shame for all the work that they put into it.
Yeah,
I talked Saturday, you were concerned about low voter turnout.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty historic that they do have a low voter turnout, isn't it?
It's unless you have a burning issue, usually the folks will not come to the.
And I think one of the other things that played into, one, the select board made a commitment to have something on the ballot in June of this year. And when the Charter Review Committee finished its work, in order to make the 60-day warning notice to try to get it on the March ballot, the board would not have had an opportunity to review the report. The public would not have had an opportunity to come and listen to the various meetings that you've had dealing with these issues. It would have been a real push to get it on the ballot in March, and I think people would have been even less informed about the changes and what they mean at that time than they are now.
It felt like quite a push the way it was. It felt like all we did was charter all winter. Every meeting we plugged away at another piece of the charter, but we hadn't gotten through it by the time we got to the March vote.
That's correct.
That's any other thoughts? Those are really appreciated. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Any other questions, comments, or have in mind, the polls open at, what time again, Stu? 7?
7 a.m., the polls open tomorrow.
Okay.
I just want to say I am honored that I could come here tonight, and there were only a handful of people, but you folks gave us your total time and attention, and I thank you all for that very much.
Thank you very much. But I'm sure folks out in Cat TV land will be
I
listening
hope
in.
so. I hope everybody's watching and they'll come out to vote tomorrow.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion. That was really helpful from all parties. Thank you. Thanks very much. We're adjourned.
Motion to close?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thanks, board, for showing up.